The night side of Jupiter glittered with enemy beacons, a jeweled noose closing around the small, stubborn lights of Earth's fleet. On every open channel the laughter came. "Is this all? 5 cruisers, 2 carriers, and a tug. Humans, you brought a parade to a war." Admiral Sarah Chen did not answer. She stood under the vault of the UES Aegis's tactical dome, where starfields bent into a gridded ocean. Her hands were steady behind her back. The bridge hummed with soft machines and steadier breathing. In that hum was the patience of a species that had learned you do not show your sharpest teeth first. "Range close to 3 million, reported Commander Raylan Hurst. He was not old, but his voice had the smooth fatigue of those who know how long nights become history. "Dominion pickets are probing. They think we're bluffing." "We are," Chen said, and a few heads turned. "Every defense begins with a story they choose to believe. Feed them ours." A ripple of electronic ghosts slid from Aegis's flanks, mirrored signatures of ships that did not exist. On enemy scopes, Earth's flotilla doubled, then tripled, then thinned like breath on glass. Laughter faltered, then rose again, crueler for having been momentarily unsure. In the Galactic Council chamber far across the light minutes, Ambassador Kale Orion set a black cube upon the polished stone. It did nothing, that was the point. The cube absorbed the chamber's light and the delegates' confidence in equal measure. "Humanity is in compliance with all accords," Orion said. "We have a right to defend our home." An Orales delegate waved a crystalline hand. "With trinkets and shadows, your fleet is a museum exhibit." "Sometimes museums hold the bones of titans," Orion replied. He did not turn as the chamber's enviroglass shivered with distant firing reports. He did not blink when the laughter reached even here. Jupiter loomed larger. On its limb, the Dominion's dreadships flexed like black cathedrals, all thrust and teeth and banners of ion flame. Sarah Chen's voice stayed level. "Phase 1 remains delay and dignity. We give them a clock and make them read it wrong." Hurst lifted his brows. He had served under admirals who wrote plans like sermons, loud, ornate, and self-referential. Chen's plans were more like poetry, compressed, ruthless, and memorized by every soul aboard. Phase I, ghost nets. Phase Roman II, hollow anchors. Phase Roman III, orchard. Orchard was not written out. It was a word saved for the dark. The first exchange was brief, like strangers touching shoulders in a crowded street and deciding not to apologize. Aegis's rail spines spat flechettes of tungsten decoding into plasma. Dominion shields answered with a snarling aurora. 2 human drones died as planned, their funerals already recorded and waiting in the memory banks for delivery to families, letters written by the crew themselves. In Earth's wars, you learn to speak to grief early. "Commander," Chen said, "recite the doctrine." He swallowed, then smiled the way you smile at a teacher who taught you to stand up straight. "Small fleet, long shadow, we are not here to win the battle cleanly. We are here to force the enemy to mismeasure the war." "Good, begin the nets." Hundreds of micro-boys blossomed, whispering false gravities into the Dominion's teeth. The enemy began to feel mass where there was none, void where there was mass. Their formations adjusted to dodge invisible debris that did not exist. Laughter thinned. Sarah Chen thought of Thucydides, who wrote that people go to war for fear, honor, and interest. The Dominion was here for interest wrapped in honor and flavored with practiced contempt. Humanity stood for fear given purpose. The old historians had whispered that power was the ability to delay a decision until it no longer mattered. Tonight, delay would matter very much. "Admiral," Hurst said, "the Council wants to know if we're requesting reinforcements." "We have no reinforcements," Chen said. "We have patience." In the chamber, Kale Orion let the silence stretch until the delegates checked their own pulse. "You heard the Admiral," he said. "Patience is our request." "And the cube?" the Orales asked. "Why the theatrics? Is it another illusion?" Orion placed his hand on the black surface. He could see his reflection only as absence, a human silhouette cut out of light. "It is a record," he said softly, "of names." The delegates went still. Even empires understood the mathematics of loss. Back at Jupiter, the Dominion's forward dragoons surged, eager to step on humanity's pride. They found the ghost nets, shrugged, and laughed again when Aegis and her companions withdrew on gentle plumes. "They run," someone sang on the wideband in a voice like bells dropped into oil. "We reposition," Achen corrected her own crew. "We teach." In the dark of the Uit, far beyond even this theater's horizon, something old and patient listened for a word. It had been built under silence and sworn to silence, starlight painted over by the careful hands of miners and monks and mathematicians. It did not know laughter. It knew only schedules measured against survival. "Phase I complete," Hurst reported. "They think this is all we have." "Then our story is working," said Admiral Chen. She allowed herself one breath, long and slow the way her grandmother had taught her, through the storm door before opening it. "Hold the line, water the orchard." The council preferred theater to truth, but truth has a way of leaking through the curtains. While delegates argued, the black cube on the table drew light the way a wound draws the eye. Kale Orion did not touch it again. 100 civilizations watched, and he needed them to wonder what it could possibly contain. Secrets, codes, threats. In reality, it held the only thing that ever overruled contempt: names of the dead. Project Titan was a rumor, the Salari speaker said, voice like violin wire. "We investigated your shipyards. We found only slips and civilian docks. No mass shadow, no industrial spike. Are we to believe you built super capitals without leaving a scar?" Orion's mouth tilted. "You looked for scars. We learned to heal as we built." Decades earlier, when Earth realized the Council's protection was conditional upon obedience and utility, a different calculus had begun. The architects did not wear parade uniforms. They wore miners' harnesses in hollowed asteroids and brought their children into the caverns to learn silence. They called it Project Orchard in public budget lines and laughed at themselves in sub-basements where laughter sounded like hope. At the edge of the solar system, tiny foundries hid in the Uit and in comets. The power curves were kept dull, flattened by carefully timed stellar harvests that never peaked twice in a row. Fabrication runs were scattered and recombined. A rib here, a truss there, cores wrapped like seeds in shells of ice. You could fly a battleship-size mass past a Dominion auditor if it looked like a family of rocks arguing about which way to drift. Orion's briefing used old Earth history that bored some species and frightened the few that paid attention. He had told them of the dreadnought that made fleets obsolete in a morning, of carriers that taught battleships to fear air, of cryptographers who turned art into armor. "We are not the strongest," he had said, "but we change the game while others keep score." Back on the front, Admiral Chen's talent was tempo. She refused every decisive engagement offered to her. When Dominion captains tried to herd Earth's flotilla toward the radiation belts, she fainted, then glided across safe arcs like a skater who knows the ice. She allowed hits that hurt pride but not survival, then returned them twofold. "Phase Roman 2, she said at last. "Hollow anchors." Hurst nodded to the engineering deck. Containers burst from their latches and blossomed into thin-walled pods, each the size of a cathedral. The pods unfolded into decoys with just enough bite, heat sinks mimicking reactors, coils humming like spinal guns, a heartbeat's worth of thrust. "Anchors online," Hurst said. "They're painting us and our ghosts. Their long guns are committing." "Good," Chen said. "Let them write our obituary in pencil." On wideband, another laugh came from a captain whose ship wore a trophy rack of scavenged hull plates. "Humans, your anchors sink." Chen did not waste contempt on amateurs. "Helm, release the pencils," she said, and Aegis loosed a volley of pen-sized drones, each carrying a coil of conductive filament thinner than hair. They threaded the firing lanes and, at a set whisper, bloomed into grids. The first salvo of enemy slugs met those grids and blurred, their telemetry arguing with itself until physics, humiliated, stumbled. Impacts dispersed like rain on reeds. "Admiral," Hurst breathed, "they just called us clever." "People say clever when they are afraid to say they learned," Chen replied. "Mark their flagships. We will teach them history next." In the council chamber, fear manifested as procedure, motions to censure, to inspect, to freeze Earth's trade. Orion fielded each with the detached courtesy of a doctor talking through side effects. "We have destabilizing memories," he said quietly, "and stabilizing responsibilities. One does not erase the other." The Orales delegate leaned close, its cooling fans purring. "You cannot possibly hide titans of any class," it said. "Mass leaves fingerprints, heat leaves footprints. We are not fools." Orion allowed the barest blink toward the cube. "We know," he said. "That is why we hid them in stories." The first hint arrived not as a sensor return, but as a rhythm. In the static between Dominion bursts in the deep bass of Jupiter's magnetosphere, a human ear trained by childhood thunderstorms could hear it, a triple beat like a heart pacing itself against catastrophe. Hurst heard it first. He closed his eyes and was 13 again under a corrugated roof, counting seconds between lightning and thunder. "Admiral," he whispered, "the orchard is ripening." Chen let the bridge be very quiet for a breath. "Then we will be worthy of harvest," she said. "Keep dancing, make them greedy." Greed came predictably. Dominion corvettes slashed ahead of their screen, eager to harpoon the fugitive human carrier with the pretty call sign and the ugly habit of surviving. They did not notice their firing cadence shift as subsystems compensated for phantom gravities. They did not notice that their fleet's massive center had begun to sink, very slightly into a well that had not been there an hour ago. Hollow anchors were not meant to survive, only to persuade. The Dominion's admirals began to think in terms of cleanup rather than contest. They compressed to finish quickly and perform triumph where cameras could see. It is a military truth that the desire for witness magnifies error. "Mark the time," Chen said. "Mark the tide." The Dominion decided to teach. Their admirals aligned lines with textbook elegance, intending to carve Earth's flotilla into an example. Sometimes lessons arrive wrapped in arrogance. Sarah Chen had planned for that wrapping. "Aegis to all hulls," she said. "Iron Echo." The command rippled through the formation. From each human ship, coffin-length canisters slid into vacuum and tumbled end over end, releasing clouds of micro-reflectors that sang back enemy radar in a different key. At the same moment, human transmitters released recordings of the Dominion's own fire control pings, delayed and shifted, so that within one heartbeat the void echoed with a choir of familiar voices arriving from the wrong directions. In naval academies, people learn about chaff and decoys. Iron Echo made the void itself complicit, recordings, reflections, and timing turning space into a hall of mirrors. Under that cover, Aegis pivoted through a vector that seemed to intersect a Dominion pike. It did not. Chen's helm officer trusted math written by engineers who thought about void the way river pilots think about currents. The pike missed by meters and centuries, the kind of miss that happens when two civilizations read different calendars. "Contact bearing +6, Hurst called. "Corvettes, they are overconfident." "Reward them," Chen said mildly. On her tack dome, an arc blossomed, the safe pocket where enemy eagerness became overextension. A squadron of human gunskiffs, ugly little boats shaped by spreadsheets and affection, knifed into that pocket and bit. 3 Dominion corvettes went dark and turned into lessons for their academy lectures. The skiffs returned limping and singing. On the bridge, nobody celebrated. They were American, Filipino, Ghanaian, Polish, Vietnamese, Brazilian, Indian, Iranian, one flag of many passports. They had trained on histories where victories were expensive and often temporary. Raylan Hurst glanced at the photograph taped to the foot of his station, his mother laughing behind a mass of basil in a kitchen too small for basil. He had promised to teach the Dominion how basil smelled someday. For now, he taught them geometry. "Dominion battle line is presenting broadsides," Hurst said. "They want a formal exchange." "Decline the invitation," Chen replied. "Aim for elbows, not fists." She marked joints between enemy ships' overlapping fields, the small places where a push became a shove and a shove became a fall. Aegis's rail spines flexed again, not to penetrate but to persuade, nicking coolant lines, blinding a sensor cluster, shaving shield harmonics half a hertz off center. The Dominion's formation began to ache in ways command diagrams do not show. Across those diagrams, a larger ache moved unobserved, gravity's soft suggestion from far-out system, a tide with purpose. The hollow anchors had retuned more than space. They had retuned expectations. Kale Orion watched the chamber's feeds without appearing to watch them. The cube sat like a mute planet at his elbow. Delegates crowded closer despite themselves. No civilization enjoys watching its confident sweat. Ambassador Orion, the Salari said, "Your fleet is clever but finite. You cannot delay indefinitely." "Of course not," he said. "Delay is never indefinite. It is measured against arrival." He did not specify what was arriving. He let the uncrowded word Titan stroll through a few imaginations and make itself at home. A Dominion attack finally found a seam. Aegis shuddered. Lights dimmed with the dignity of a bow. Someone's prayer finished as a hiss between teeth. "Minor hull breach in Beta Ring," the operations chief said. "Sealed, casualties too." Chen closed her eyes for a half of a heartbeat. Somewhere a mother would not receive the basal lesson. She touched the rail with the back of her fingers, greeting an old friend with a new scar. "Transmit 2 names to the cube," she said. "They join our quorum." "Admiral," Hurst said, "they're probing for our magazine signatures. If they map our cycles, our next volley becomes predictable." "Then we will not be the ones who fire it," Chen said. "Give me Orchard Green." The call went out in a language killed and resurrected on Earth, a clipped cant of engineers, ciphers, dock workers. In farm towns, the same word meant rows of trees teaching patience in seasons. In the Uit, it meant a calendar with teeth. Far from Jupiter's polite carnage, ice moved. It moved with intent. From the shadow of a tumbling Borg, the size of a city, an object detached, matched the tumble, then ceased. Stars returned along its edges in slow, offended lines as light recalculated its plan. Thermals rose not as a flare, but as a horizon. Mass registered faintly, like a footstep felt through old wood. Iron echo continued. Hollow anchors ached into not being. Human skiffs bled heat and grit and stubborn jokes. The Dominion pressed harder because they had to. The story they had started required an ending with banners. On 1,000 screens across the Council's worlds, audiences leaned forward the way crowds lean when a tightrope walker pretends to wobble. Orion kept his breathing even and imagined the smell of basil. "Admiral," Hurst said very quietly, as if in a library, "I think I can hear thunder." "So can they," Sarah Chen replied. "They just don't know where it is." Dominion Command finally committed its center. The dreadships advanced in a stately surge, their formation a cathedral moving on rails. Commentary feeds lit with predictions of a decisive strike. Anchors rehearsed Earth's defeat as if reading weather. The small human fleet would either be brave and broken or treacherous and broken. Either way, the spectacle would reassure clients and frighten rivals. Sarah Chen stood with her back straight and her weight balanced over the ship's pulse. On the tack dome, her fleet's icons retreated in good order toward a geometry that looked, to alien eyes, like surrender. Hurst's knuckles stayed pale on his station, but his voice kept the lightness of a man who knows a secret. "They're slowing slightly as they compress," he said. "Gravity's misbehaving." "It does that," Chen said. "So do people who think in straight lines." On command channels, Dominion admirals traded congratulations for predicted maneuvers. Their fire plan assumed Earth's magazines and reactors were at their designed capacities. Both plans were brittle. "Ambassador," the Orali's delegate purred, "this is over. Call your ships home." Kale Orion did not look away from the cube. "We do not sign terms written over fresh graves," he said. "It is not over. Watch the edges of your screens," he added, too softly for the mics but loud for the diplomats close enough to dislike him. The first edge flickered. A sensor officer frowned, then dismissed the artifact. The second edge bent like light glimpsed through heat, then corrected. On the third edge, a junior lieutenant whispered she had counted a beat in no reactor table. "Are you ready?" Chen asked quietly. She had learned in storms that shouting is a kindness after the wave hits, not before. This is the part, she said, where small things cast very long shadows. Hurst's hands hovered over his board. He felt absurdly, like a boy about to snap a kite into a wind only he could taste. Green across, he said. Orchard is listening. Then say grace. He whispered, may our work matter, may our hands be steady, may our dead forgive us. 1,000 kilometers beyond the Dominion line, a star field blinked, not like an eye, but like a machine rejecting an old assumption. Black on black deepened. The first Titan arrived as subtraction. It slid from the Uit's shadow like a continent unshelved. Lenses the size of amphitheaters rotated once, indifferent to new audiences. Along its spine, vault doors unlatched with monastic patience. The ship wore no banners, no paint, no boast. Its name came through tight beam as a single human word that did not translate. Leviathan. The second arrived half a beat later, then a third, each from a different bearing, each wearing the same monastic austerity. Where Dominion dreadships glittered like jewelry, the Titans did not glitter at all. They drank starlight and gave back intent. Council feeds gasped. Deepfake algorithms stalled, then emitted polite errors. Economists revised futures in their heads so quickly some forgot to blink. Admiral, Hurst said, breathless despite himself, we have positive locks across the orchard. Titans are painting our targets. Then we will stop teaching elbows, Chen said softly, and teach bones. Dominion admirals saw the arrivals a heartbeat after their crews and cursed their own certainty. Orders spun out, scatter, reassign fire, target the newcomers. But the Titans had already solved the first move in that old game, what dreadnoughts and carriers solved in oceans long gone. They held range and wrote the geometry. Leviathan spoke in force rather than words. Its spinal gun did not fire a shell so much as decide that a segment of space should briefly remember being a mountain. Where that memory touched a Dominion shield, harmonics failed in a spreading lace. The second Titan's broadside followed, kinetics in fields that refused to be tricked by decoys. The third uncoiled beams so clean the void looked shaved. On the council floor, the Orali's delegate forgot its appetite for theater. Impossible, it hissed. This is a violation of parity. Parity, Orion said, is not a law of physics. He placed 2 fingers on the cube and pressed. It acknowledged him with a faint click, as if a book had opened to the page that matters. The small fleet that had been mocked, rerouted on cues, only visible to crews who had practiced with ghosts. Anchors died in silence. Iron echo shifted from mimicry to harmony, its stolen pings singing with the Titan's cold music. Around Jupiter, the Dominion finally saw the map become a river and knew they were downstream. Begin phase Roman 4, Sarah Chen said. She did not smile. She did not raise her voice. She simply gave the word the Titans had waited years to hear, the one every miner and mathematician and mother had promised themselves they would one day deserve. Harvest. From the darkness they had called home, the Titans answered. Harvest began like a correction to a long miscalculation. The Titans did not surge. They arrived in measures, each movement a proof. Where Dominion doctrine expected volume, the Titans gave precision. Where enemy admirals demanded spectacle, the Titans answered with geometry. Orchard is green across the net, Hurst reported. On the dome, faint cones of influence stitched from the Uit to Jupiter's limb, invisible to the eye but loud to instruments. Leviathan is assigning lanes. Behemoth is writing timing. Copy, Admiral Chen said. Aegis and Flotilla, Shepherd, don't stampede. We are here to teach. She marked corridors the way a city planner draws evacuation routes, wide enough for panic, narrow enough for control. Skiffs nosed into those channels, their rail spines flicking, not to kill but to steer. They clipped shield edges, shaved harmonics, tasted heat. Dominion corvettes seeking heroics found themselves nudged into the quiet shade where Leviathan's spinal gun was already waiting. The first Titan volley did not roar. Space did not offer applause. It was simply there and then not. A Dominion dreadship's forward third blurred, its shields remembering another frequency they had sworn never to use. Lights along its spine guttered like candles near a window. The ship drifted into irrelevance, still massive, no longer meaningful. Allied traffic, Hurst warned. Dominion open channel. A voice, strained and formal. Human Admiral, identify your supercapital class for council inspection. You are in violation of parity. Parity is a sentimental word, Chen replied. Recommend you save your crew. On civilian feeds, the laughter finally died, replaced by a silence that felt like altitude. The council chamber, so fond of theatrics, forgot its lines. Delegates leaned toward their screens with the same instinct that makes people lean when a precipice offers a view. Kale Orion rested a palm on the black cube without pressing. It warmed beneath his hand, logging 2 more names sent from Aegis. The cube's weight was not metal but memory. Behemoth put a lesson on the line. Its broadside did not punch holes, it braided them. Kinetic darts arrived not as a wall but as a woven argument. Slice coolant, break phase sink, unhinge bearings. The Dominion dreadship Vexorum, proud cathedral of a doctrine built on intimidation, began to list like a palace on bad foundations. Spectators at home recognized the choreography of hubris. They had seen it in history plays about kings. Aegis, eyes on your right, came Leviathan's commander, old voice, unhurried, trained in patience by ice. Your shepherd corridor is crowding. Copy, Chen said. She adjusted with 2 finger taps and a breath, the way a violinist adjusts tuning with a wrist. Skiff flight echo, open the lane, use soft hands. Soft hands, they answered, and slid between panic and ego like paramedics between spectators. On enemy command bands, bravado cracked. Orders duplicated and contradicted. One admiral screamed artillery positions in the clear. Another whispered a prayer he had never practiced. Dominion doctrine discovered that certainty under pressure fractures into superstition. Ambassador, the Orales delegate said, distortion creeping into its crystal voice. How did you hide that mass? We didn't. Orion said, you looked for spikes. We learned to flatten curves. He did not look away from the cube. Our engineers built like gardeners under winter. They learned the weight of patience. Leviathan fired again. It was not mercy. It was restraint. A line of cruisers went dark in a cadence that made sense to anyone who had ever read music, not a crescendo to crush, but a steady cut to convince. Cameras caught lifeboats peeling out in neat arcs, untouched. Aegis's skiffs rode shotgun for those arcs, warning off scavengers with sharp little taps. Law of rescue applies, Chen reminded her crews. We survive by the laws we keep when it is inconvenient. The Dominion tried theater. Their anthem rolled across bands, bass-heavy and triumphant, 1,000 voices insisting the story had not changed. Mid-chorus, Behemoth unstitched the lead dreadship's shield lattice with a 3-note phrase. The anthem hiccuped into static. Millions of viewers watched certainty become a meme and then ash. Dominion center compressing, Hurst said, their timing is desperate. Desperation has a rhythm, Chen answered. Match it, then change it. She slid her little fleet forward, just enough to be seen, not enough to be central. The mockers of yesterday could see them now as the flint that makes the spark. Small fleet, long shadow, an equation the Titans turned into climate. Message from the Dominion flagship. Comms added, they ask, what do you want? Chen looked at the dome, at the names waiting in the cube, at the corridors for lifeboats that her own guns had carved. For you to understand, we asked first, she said. You laughed. Behemoth answered with a quiet correction. Atlas, still silent in the dark, rotated 1 ponderous degree, as if the planet-sized machine were listening for a word only humans used when the fight began to favor them. Enough. Enough is a decision, not a number. The Titans advanced like glaciers that had discovered engines, and the Dominion discovered that there is no negotiation with momentum. Their admirals tried to pull the center back into shape. Physics answered with gentle refusals. Hollow anchors had tilted the board. Iron echo kept it slippery. The small human flotilla threaded the gaps with a rope's instinct for tension. Balance on the 5, Chen said, watching thrust plumes dance like handwriting across the dome. If our line looks too clean, they think trap. If it looks too ragged, they try valor. We need them choosing safety. Safety inside Titan envelopes, Hurst said, almost cheerful. Exactly, get them used to the shadow that spares. He heard the lesson under the order. In academies, they taught force. On Aegis, they taught posture. The Dominion's last good try came wrapped in tradition. A wedge of heavy ships cutting for Aegis's throat, banners broadcast, escorts singing their house names. It would have destroyed a captain who mistook rank for leverage. Chen did not. Echo flight, string reeds, she ordered. Drones sprayed filaments invisibly through space, and the wedge felt itself argue with its own telemetry. The first rank turned 2 degrees to correct enough. Behemoth wrote a straight line through the gap they opened. The wedge forgot how to be a wedge. The council, which loved tidy outcomes, faltered. Sanction blocks assembled, dissolved, reassembled with new adjectives. A few delegates, smelling a new wind, murmured about partnership, mutual frameworks, co-development of Titan adjacent, words like handshakes before hands are cleaned. Orion stood at his station as if he had all the time the Uit had saved. You can't legislate respect after the fact, he said, not for the record, but to the few who could hear. You can only notice it earlier next time. Admiral, comms cut in. Dominion flagship broadcasting on a civilian band. They're offering surrender conditions to us. Surprise in the syllables, enemies who had laughed now requesting etiquette. Conditions? No, Chen said. They may request mercy, they may not write it. She lifted her chin toward the dome. We will show it anyway, that is the difference. She published 3 rules fleet-wide: no fires on lifeboats, record every shot and the words around it, leave a door. The rules snapped into the muscle memory of crews raised on storms and city grids and funerals with casseroles. Skiffs escorted escape pods. Rail guns shifted to cut rather than crush. The Titans, built for ending arguments, reoriented to ending excuses. Atlas finally spoke, first to Leviathan, then to Aegis. Its voice was patient gravity. Gravwell projector is green. We can draw their center out of phase with Jupiter's belt without collapse. Demonstrate, Chen said, without damage. Atlas obeyed. A soft pressure slid across the battle space, a tide deciding to take a different beach. Dominion formations wavered, not from blast, but from a feeling in the bones that their ships were slightly misplaced in a universe that had been otherwise. Admirals accustomed to blaming crews found themselves checking their own breath. Panic receded, not because they were brave, but because fear exhausted itself. Council feed redlining, Hurst noted. Half the galaxy just watched us wag gravity. Let them, Chen said. Better 1,000 witnesses to restraint than 100 rumors of cruelty. On the floor, the Orali's delegate hissed, You are rewriting doctrine on open broadcast. Orion's reply was almost kind. No, we are reminding you that doctrine without humility becomes ritual. Humans build rituals too, then we break them when they stop saving lives. The Dominion's flagship came about, slow and wounded, trailing fragments like the tail of a comet that had survived a prophecy. Its commander, voice scraped raw, addressed Chen directly. We withdraw. We acknowledge your terms. You acknowledge the dead, Chen said. You acknowledge that lifeboats move unmolested. You acknowledge that your prisoners will be exchanged before your ships are repaired. She could hear herself on a future recording, teaching a class of young officers that mercy has teeth when it arrives in order. And you acknowledge that your laughter had a cost. Understood, the commander said carefully, as if learning a new alphabet. Behemoth eased its guns down 1 note. Leviathan trimmed its aim a breath to starboard. Atlas throttled the tide back to neutral. The small human flotilla kept moving, like shepherd dogs who know the sheep still remember wolves. Hurst leaned back, eyes burning from hours of unblinking blue. He thought of Basil in a too-small kitchen and how it smelled like victory that didn't gloat. In the wreckage fields, Aegis launched pods marked with a simple sigil, a circle with a door. Inside were medkits, water, a bright orange card in 7 languages. This mercy is policy, not charity. Remember it. Cameras watched because cameras would tell tomorrow's story when today's nerves forgot. War quieted into negotiation, which is to say it found a new theater for courage. The Dominion fleet, such as it remained, fell back toward Saturn's shadow with its guns mostly silent and its pride carefully sheathed. The Titans settled into sentinel patterns like mountains deciding to be borders. Aegis and her tired flotilla cruised the lanes between lifeboats and surrendering cruisers, policing with a gentleness that made a better threat than any cannon. In the Council, noise tried to reassert itself. Motions proliferated: censure, inspection, reparations, peacekeepers. Words that had kept lesser crises busy for generations now sounded thin. Orion did not raise his voice because he had learned that volume is a tax on attention you pay when you lack gravity. He placed the cube in the center of their table. "You will hear the names," he said. The chamber resisted. Protocols fluttered like papers in a draft. Someone objected to theatrics, another to human cultural practices intruding on policy. Orion pressed the cube. It opened with a click that seemed louder than engines. A woman's voice read the first name, then the second, then the third, cadence certain, accent unimportant, vowels unadorned. The reading traveled out on the same bands that had broadcast laughter the day before. "Ambassador," the Salari said at last, brittle. "What do you want?" "A charter that fits reality," Orion said. "Not our fantasy nor yours. A right to unmolested home defense. A prohibition on collective punishment disguised as containment. A verification regime for blockades that includes the blockaded, transparency on Council peacekeeping deployments, and the Council's admission that parity is not a moral category but a statistical artifact." "You are trying to rewrite the order," the Orales spat. "The order rewrote itself when you decided we were decoration," Orion answered. "We're simply updating the minutes." On the dome above Jupiter, Chen was rewriting at a different level. She opened a tight beam to the Dominion commander who had surrendered without surrender's usual poetry. His face was older than his rank, and his eyes had that look professional soldiers share after a doctrine dies. "We can keep killing," Chen said. "It will be tidy. Or we can anchor a corridor and begin exchanging prisoners and data. Help me teach your crews that a lifeboat is a promise kept, not a bet lost." He hesitated. Ego tried one more time to sell him an exit. Then training, that quieter form of courage, took over. "Corridor acknowledged," he said. "We will transmit coordinates for civilian rescue." "Good," Chen said. "And your anthem?" He blinked. "Next time, sing it with the verse about mercy," she said, and cut the line before he could decide to be offended. Atlas chose that moment to hum. The grav projector swept a ribbon across Saturn's rings and lifted a narrow band of ice and stone into a clean arc, then set it down precisely where it had been. No ship was touched. No hull creaked. The message was unambiguous: "We can move your borders without touching your flags." Council feeds, already at their limit, found new ones. Economists recalculated careers. Admirals watched and understood that surprise had joined firepower as a domain of war again. Citizens, more honest than their leaders, sent messages into public streams: "Don't provoke the gardeners. They plant deep." Votes in the chamber began to tip. The abstainers addicted to safety found none. The opportunists found a better opportunity. The proud found a new way to be proud, by backing into wisdom. When the tally stabilized, it spelled an interim instrument with an unromantic name: Armistice of the Orchard, and 3 romantic clauses. 1. Right of shade. Any world may shelter under a defensive shadow projected by its own resources or allies without being declared an aggressor by display alone. 2. Witness doctrine. Combatants must broadcast authenticated telemetry and casualty lists in near-real time to a neutral archive, jointly administered, open to all. 3. Door kept open. Lifeboats, hospitals, and corridors are not negotiations. They are infrastructure. Any party interfering forfeits inspection privileges for a year. The chamber had never passed anything so quickly. It had also never been watched by so many Titans. Orion bowed his head, a gesture the cameras liked and his opponents mistook for relief. It was neither. It was respect to the names. He sent the document to Aegis with one line, hold them to it. After war comes work. The first work was water and air, hoses snaking into lifeboats, med pouches tossed across drifting gulfs, translators switching to nursery cadences. Aegis's decks sounded like the world's simplest factory. Fix, feed, ferry. Run by people who had just taught the galaxy to fear them and now insisted on teaching it to live with them. Damage control reports green -1. Hurst Reed hoarse with the fatigue that follows restraint. We lost Beta Ring's outer plates. We kept our soul. We keep it by using it, Chen said. She stood on a quiet catwalk above the main bay, watching crews in every language dock enemy pods to their own gantries. Tattoos that had promised vengeance now lifted stretchers. The discipline felt more dangerous than gunfire to anyone who understood how power decays. The behemoth kept station over the wreck field, a monastery with a lighthouse. Leviathan patrolled the perimeter with a mathematician's patience. Atlas tucked itself into shadow like a lesson put back on the shelf. None of them asked for parades. The crews on the small human ships did not ask either. They built something better than a parade, a list. Names filled the cube, not only human. Dominion dead, too. Chen sent those lists in clear with coordinates to the flagship that had found the courage to learn publicly. When their reply came back stiff, formal, grateful in a grammar that did not yet have a word for gratitude from an enemy, Hurst smiled without triumph. They're going to remember this more than the beams. They should, Chen said. Fear fades, rituals stay. In the council, rituals were being rewritten by clerks who had never expected to change fonts. The armistice of the orchards clauses spread into briefing rooms and academies. Young officers who had trained on formations now trained on corridors. Inspectors from minor worlds found themselves treated as equals because the Titans' cameras didn't care about titles. Some diplomats called it humiliation. Others, who had scraped their knuckles on larger empires' doors for decades, called it a beginning. Orion did not celebrate. He took the cube back to his quarters and listened to the names again. He wrote 3 letters by hand, a habit he kept because no one hacks paper quickly to mothers who would not smell basil in kitchens that had waited. He did not offer heroism, he offered witness. Aegis, this is Leviathan, came the tight beam hours later. Stand down to readiness 2. Orchard goes to archive. Copy, Chen said, and with that one phrase, a chapter ended not in triumph, but in filing. On the TAC dome, icons dimmed like stage lights after a curtain call that the actors refused to take. Titans pivoted on slow gimbals, bowing toward the Uit where asteroids wait with the patience of old tools. Hurst lingered at his station. Admiral, he said, when do we show them the Titans again? When the laughter returns, she said. And until then, we stay small, he said, catching the rhythm. We stay small, she agreed. Long enough that the shadow feels like shade. In the belts around Jupiter, wreckage became memorials. Crews welded plates into rings, each etched with a name, human and Dominion, circling the planet like quiet satellites of consequence. Pilots approaching the inner system would see them and adjust their language, maybe their doctrine. The Dominion flagship signaled one last time before translation. Its commander appeared, tired and less armored by habit. Admiral Chen, he said, we have amended our anthem. Sing it to your children, she replied. They will need it more than your parades. He nodded and cut the line because some dignities should not be performed in front of those who enforced them. Atlas sank into night. Behemoth drew its beams tight as if gathering a cloak. Leviathan rolled once, a continent shaking snow from pines, then vanished where light goes to keep secrets. The Uit received them with the silence of monks closing a heavy door. Across the galaxy, people who had laughed at small fleets began telling different jokes about giant ships that arrive from nowhere and leave without demanding tribute, about gardeners whose orchards bear strange fruit, about a species that hides patience in ice and turns grief into ships. Some called it propaganda, Others called it history in the tense that matters, present continuous. On Aegis, Chen walked the quiet ring where Beta had been and touched the new weld with the back of her fingers. "We are not the strongest," she said to the ship, to the crew, to the names, "but we change the game while others keep score." And somewhere in a kitchen the size of a memory, Basil grew under a window, catching light from a star that had watched Titans move and decided, wisely, to stay in place. The lesson would outlive the broadcast. They laughed at Earth's small fleet, until the Titans arrived and stayed only as long as needed to teach what dignity requires.